Hey everybody, this is Steve. This is part 2 of my John 13 series. And in this part of it, I'm going to talk about one of the people that Jesus washed the feet of in John 13, and that's Judas. And just, the implications behind Jesus washing the feet of the man who's about to betray him. But before I jump into that, it's kind of the teaser. I'm going to review a little bit what I talked about last time in part 1, just because I'm going to make some connections with that and build upon it. And so in part 1, I just shared how in John 13 we see Jesus at this feast before he's about to be betrayed. And in the beginning of the chapter, it says Jesus wants to show the full extent of his love. And then we see him go and wash his disciples' feet. And back in that time, feet would have been this really gross, dirty part, of a person. And we see Jesus humbly, doing something that not even necessarily a servant would have been expected to do for his disciples. Him as the king of the universe. And so it's pretty crazy. It's a pretty ridiculous thing and just an amazing act of service and love in itself. But it says at the beginning, Jesus wants to show the full extent of his love. And so I believe what this feet washing these dirty parts of his disciples was meant to point them and us toward is the cross, which is, I believe, the full extent of Jesus' love. And so when we look at the cross, Jesus laid down his life for us willingly so that he can clean spiritually our dirty feet. And what that would represent in a spiritual sense is sin. And sin nowadays, I think, can really be a dirty word, whether you're in the church or outside the church. I think, unfortunately, it is a negative thing, but it has a lot of negative connotations because of the way I think it's been used or thought about. And really what I want to just point out is that sin, in a more broad sense, and the effect that it has, is anything that separates us from relationship with God or others, or us being created in God's image and being meant to express that. Sin is anything that tries to defile, destroy, or violate that. And so I think all of us can agree those kind of two broad categories are bad things that sin does. And in that sense, Jesus came and he laid down his life and wants to show us his love so much that he died so that those dirty parts of us, these things that are trying to separate us from God and each other, no longer have to be there. We just need to come as we are, dirty feet and all, and he will cleanse us so that we can be relationally made right with God and one another. And so this is the main thing I was hammering is come as you are, let Jesus be the one that cleans your feet spiritually, washes away your sin. And it's not you needing to get your life right or become a good person. It's you just needing to accept Jesus' love for you. And so that was kind of the first part of the message. And then the second part was just, we see that Jesus did this for his disciples. And then he says we need to now go do this for others. So we as Christians now need to go and wash other people's feet in that example that it's meant to set, of loving them, dirty feet and all, showing them this unconditional love that is meant to express Christ's love, which is the only thing that changes hearts. And so that is what I talked about in the first part. And then I just wanted to highlight when Jesus is washing his disciples' feet, one of the disciples he would have been washing is Judas Iscariot. And that's the person that ultimately betrays him and turns him over and has him murdered. And before he's just about to do that, Jesus knows he's just about to do that. He talks about how he knows someone's going to betray him. He knows who it is. And instead of attacking or lashing out at Judas, and it's important to know that Jesus had all the power in the world to stop himself from being crucified. He says he could have had legions of angels sent down to stop this, but he willingly went to the cross for us. But instead of attacking or lashing out at this person who is about to ultimately have him murdered, he chooses to love them. That's his response. And I just think that just shows God's heart and his character for us. He will love us to the very end. Even to the point where we've made the decision in our heart to betray him to the point where it led to his murder, he still loved Judas up to that whole feast. I feel like he was just trying to say, Judas, please, turn back to me. And not in a selfish way where he wasn't trying to go to the cross. Jesus submitted himself to the cross, but in a way where he's trying to help his friend and wants what's best for him. And we just, Jesus even calls him friend when he's in the garden and about to turn him over to like the guards that ultimately arrest him. He calls him friend because he cared about him. He loved Judas, and he loved Judas so much he washed his feet to give him every chance. This act of service and humility, just saying, please, like, just give this to me and I'll take it. And like, you don't have to go through with this and the harm it's going to cause you. But Judas, like Jesus, the final thing we kind of see in that interaction, in John at least, is he dips this bread and he says whoever he hands this bread to is the one that's going to betray him, and he hands it to Judas. And I just see this bread, Jesus' body being broken as like bread, like we do that now during communion. And I see it as kind of this offering of like, this is like salvation, this is life, and this is what I want to give you. And so he hands that to Judas. Judas takes it. And it's like Judas knows what that is. Judas has walked with him his whole life. And that's what makes this offense all the greater. It's like, again, this is a friend, someone who spent time with him. They've shared meals. They've prayed. He's seen miracles through Jesus. He knows Jesus. So he's got this bread, this choice to choose what Jesus is trying to give him. And instead, I kind of just imagine, it might be metaphorically, he might have ate the bread. I don't know what he did. Kind of chucking what Jesus is trying to offer him and saying, you know what? Here's these 30 silver coins. These look pretty good. I'm going to take those instead, because that's the price that he got to betray Jesus. And so he goes, he takes those 30 coins, and it's sad. It's like, it's not what Jesus, I think, through the way he was loving him, would have hoped for him to make that decision. I think he would have loved to have seen Judas's heart change in that moment. And so, it's such an incredible act of love. And I think it also tells us like, hey, Jesus is going to love us to the end, but there's a point where we have to accept what he's giving us. And so I'd invite you, if you've never chosen to follow Jesus, or if you're following Jesus and you feel like there's these silver coins that keep distracting you, that you're pursuing, like, take that bread and say, you know what? There's nothing in between me and God, because he's still loving me. He's still washing my feet, these dirtiest parts of me. And I'm going to give those to him, and I'm going to let him cleanse me. And then that way you can restore relational wholeness with him and the world, because when we're not in right relationship with God, it's going to mess up our other relationships. And so that's definitely probably what I would say is the most important part. Like, I feel like God is always wanting you to turn to him. So no matter what you've done, like, let your heart be transformed by his love and turn back to him. But the second part is that he calls us to also wash each other's feet. And so with this example and him loving this person that would have, even though he called him friend, be doing something that would be like an enemy would, right? Like, this now would be, in some ways, Judas would kind of be his enemy in at least the actions that he's going to perform. And Jesus is loving someone that's his enemy. And Jesus commands us to actually love our enemies. But for us, are we doing that same thing? Are we taking this example that Jesus gave us and doing that with the relationships in our lives, or people that we might even call enemies in our life? Or are we lashing out and attacking them? Because somehow we see Jesus perfectly hold a tension between, in no way did he like the fact that, betrayal was happening, deceit, lying, and ultimately murder. Like, in no ways does Jesus embrace those things, but he also maintain this posture of loving the person, right? He could still see that image of God that Judas was created in and meant to express and chose not to, and he loved him in a way to try to pull that out of him. And so now we as Christ followers are commanded, he says, go and wash each other's feet. We're told to do this. And are we doing that? And that's what I would say, especially church. Are we doing this? Like, when we get on social media, do we see us still loving the person despite maybe disagreeing with what they're saying, or are we lashing out and attacking them? And I'm not going to go too deep into that, because I think you know what you're doing, and I would ask you to search your heart. And if you do recognize that that is something you're doing, and I know for myself, too often, it's what I do, right? Like, sin, the root of a lot of sin is selfishness, and my selfishness causes me, unfortunately, to hurt other people a lot of times. And then I just say, hey, check your heart, and let the love of God transform you. Bring that to God and say, I need your love in this part of my life, and help me to demonstrate that to others. So that's my big takeaways. I think outside of that, I just always want to say, if you have been following Christ your whole life, if this is a new thing to you, maybe you've never heard about Jesus, or it's the first time you've really thought about exploring what that means, you're more than welcome to DM me, ask me questions, give me feedback if there's something that you thought was cool, or maybe something that you disagreed with, I totally encourage you to DM me. And also, another thing I wanted to offer is just if you're looking for discipleship, maybe going deeper in your relationship with God and haven't found a person to do that with, feel free to DM me. And as much as my bandwidth allows, I'd love to do that with people. And if my bandwidth gets filled up and I'm not able to do that, I definitely know other people who are very interested in doing that too. So yeah, those are just kind of my last thoughts. And then, final thought is just when you hear the song Reckless Love, think about the way that Jesus loved Judas till the very end, giving him every opportunity to try to turn and not do the thing that he did. Because Jesus' love in that way, I think, is kind of reckless. And not reckless in a sense where he doesn't know what he's doing or he's going to accidentally cause someone harm. The only person that got harmed in the way that's reckless is, and he loved so much that it caused harm to himself, right? Like in that sense, from a human perspective, that would be what we would see as reckless. And so, yeah, when that song comes on, imagine if he loves Judas that much, how much does he love me? All right. Well, hey, I love you guys. Hope you're having a great day, and peace and grace.